What defines a tragedy? One idea that comes to mind when thinking about this is the concept of an unspoken truth. It could be the life someone has lived or the sacrifices one has made becoming buried under deception and will ultimately never see the light of day. This managed to be avoided within the story of Lin Ling and Nice, as in the end the truth came out and led to the birth of the commoner. Unusual circumstances as it already was, there was light in the truth, at least up until we arrived at the end of the tunnel. If anyone were to tell you during the weekend of episode 4 that E-soul's story would end up as a tragedy, I doubt anyone would hear you out, considering we all had pitchforks. However, as we are off his story now and are in the middle of the phase of Lucky Science, I can't help but to feel that way. E-soul's story is one of the champions whose final days was twisted by the ambitions of others and ultimately ended by a young boy whose dream came alive way too fast under not so normal circumstances. This story had everything from heavy emotions to a fight that is easily one of 2025's best, and a twist that if you pay just enough attention to, you might have been able to see it coming, though it doesn't take away from the brilliant execution towards the end of the finale. In order to truly reach the heart of this tragic story, I think it's best if we go back to the very beginning, to the day the first X was born. A lot of our first major introductions to these characters outside of the main trailer was actually from their individual promotional videos, displaying their ambitions, origins, motivations, and even hidden emotions. Out of all of them, however, E-soul's is easily the most epic, with foreshadowing for the inevitable conflict seemingly against himself, in which due time we would begin to understand the nuance. The fight we see is against the villain known as Zero, one of the reoccurring biggest bads mentioned in the series, which led E-soul to confront him many years ago, labeled as the Dawn Incident. His victory here would lead him to become the first ever X, which with that in mind has pretty much confirmed the idea that the section in the OP with all the other heroes towards the end are previous X's leading up to our current. Many of them I'm sure we'll get more glimpses of throughout the rest of the story, but for the time being, it's evident that becoming the first certainly had its burden. The memorial of those who lost their lives in the Dawn Incident being a standing reminder of his origin, and just like Furman, there are certain things that must be upheld. E-soul's mask stood for something greater than himself. Even though it may not weigh as much in comparison to Furman's statue, it's the idea that a hero is somebody that can change someone's view forever that holds just as much weight. Even if we may not truly know these heroes, there is a certain level of trust given by the people that is gained from the display of courage. That trust can give birth to a symbol, and for as long as that symbol continues to live on, then so would the fire within people's hearts. A fire that would also be born in the heart of young Chang, not only saved by E-soul after the murder of his parents, but would soon go on to be a theme park hero representing E-soul, bestowing that same fire into the hearts of children. The way I see it, young Chang's rising is one that would happen too fast for his own well-being. Like with Lin Ling, there is a lot to capitalize on during an era where heroes' trust can be grown through social media. From his major save of Little Pomelo also garnering his first trust value point, his ascendance would take social media by storm. There's a new E-soul in town, one that everyone can see without a mask as well, which would then put us on a path of the new E-soul versus the old E-soul. The interesting thing here as well is that trust can actually be split if contested enough. Unlike Lin Ling, who wore Nice's shoes, we have two E-souls coexisting now, putting two sides against one another. While the original E-soul would not entertain all the online chatter and PR concerns for the longest, young Chang and his crew would seize the opportunity, and well, who could blame them? Now this kid who initially lost everything can finally become who he wants to be, but what was in motion was not as sweet as it sounded. Obviously, when you come for such a heavy mantle, let alone a heavy legacy, there is going to be a lot of pushback. All the drama online, the authorities getting involved, and if that wasn't enough, then young Chang's own lack of confidence would surely be the cherry on top. There were a lot of moments throughout this story that I couldn't help but feel that despite the spotlight, there was this giant dark looming cloud looming over his head. Part of it would come from all this rapid change, else Elsewhere, you could see the insecurity given his crush on Chang, but at the heart of it all lies his trauma. Episode 6 displayed this pretty vividly with a borderline mental breakdown. With his status being challenged, all he could think about was the hardships he'd endured growing up. It became apparent that trust is more than what makes a hero, it's everything in this world. From the people who acknowledge you to the companies that may hire you, without trust you aren't getting far at all, and it's easy for the weight of hopelessness to crush you without it. I thought Deku had a tough start with no quirk, but this is a whole lot worse than I could have ever imagined. It didn't help that throughout all this controversy, Chang was unable to really get a hold on anything without the aid of Shang Chao, and his presence wasn't already the most welcome given the romantic friction in the room. Heroic ambitions, envy, and trauma are areas that can be exploited, and with the right timing and moves, all pieces would fall into place. What started out as this bright beginning of a new hero slowly began creeping up on something much darker, and if there is anything we learned from our first batch of episodes, it's that the trigger will always be an episode away. One minute we're uplifted by a friend, and the next thing you know, we're burying them. The circumstances around Shang Chao's death were already questionable enough, given I had liked to imagine that E-soul would never play that dirty. However, the damage had been done, and what more could words do at this point? There was a knife being pointed directly at the original E-soul, and Chang would be the one wielding it. To make it worse, the original E-soul could not necessarily ignore that knife. Not because it was his contemporary wielding it, but because of the public perception. Silence would be weaponized by social media, and things were reaching a critical point. There may have been a lot to gain for Chang in the public eye, but there was a whole lot more to lose for the original E-soul. His very mantle being challenged, the symbol he stood for coming into question, years of unshakable conviction being brought to yield because the trust of the people demanded it so. It's extremely unfair because the original E-soul didn't spend his life becoming the hero he did just to entertain public perception and petty conflict. He didn't care about rankings, nor was he a puppet by his own organization. The horizon he sought to protect was more than that, but it's not what society was taking into account of at the time, and at this point there really is nothing left to say. Among all things considered, the one thing we knew from the very beginning is that conflict is coming, and come episode 7, X-Day would arrive. Before I go any further, can we please talk about how Neon Rain is one of the best OSTs this year so far? Shout out to Hitafumi Kenmochi. The lyrics I feel speak for both of our E-souls, but in the end, only one of them can remain. This fight was as big of a spectacle as you can imagine, simultaneously going on during Lucky Science's concert, and with a snap of what I'm banking on to be X's power, we once again move into 2D and the showdown begins. Blow after blow, regardless of the blood spilt, millions of people are watching live to see who will come out on top, but this in itself is so incredibly screwed up. It's different if this would force the original E-soul to retire, but this was straight up an execution being broadcasted for the world to see. Despite the controversy, the only thing that mattered was who would be alive at the end of the day. If it wasn't already obvious before, this hero's society is extremely broken. It's full of broken people whose ideals or hearts can be shattered with enough trust, and the very people who contribute to it don't even notice it. People like Enlighter and Wolf Girl are actually what society needs more of, because they can peer into the darkness and see the truth, but when that truth is covered up well enough, what we are left with is senseless violence that should never have gotten to this point. Slowly but surely, the tide of this fight began to change, the scales began to tip, and the one moment that truly sealed the deal was the moment E-soul gave into using his most powerful attack. The same attack that brought the Dawn incident to a close being used once again, but this time on the very boy he saved. There was purpose for such a thing back then, but now in his final moments, I can't help but wonder if E-soul thought to himself, is this really where my journey ends at? Having to strike down the boy who he saved with a move that is meant to kill. In an instant, instant the curtains closed on the battle, and as spectacular as it was, it would be Uncle Rock, or I guess Chairman Rock, that really stole the episode. The one thing that flew right past me in episode 5 was that the same voice actor for Rock was also the one that passed on young Chang during the E-soul competition, meaning that the hints were there that something was not right about Rock all this time, and sure enough, it all came together. From the kidnapping of Pomelo to the death of Shang Chao, every major event that occurred was but another piece on the checkerboard, all for the chairman to gain a powerful new pawn under his full control. And with that in mind, now we can understand how Moon ended up in the position to be killed, especially when we see that young Chang actually hesitated to save his friend out of jealousy and yet didn't hesitate to take someone's life. To think that one person believing in him would end up being manipulated to this extent blew me away. I had to walk away from my chair by the time the credits started rolling, as once again this show made me feel things that I have not felt in years. This is brick by brick storytelling being delivered as good as it can be on a weekly basis, but a sad afterthought lingered in our minds as discussions began. In the end, the original E-soul got dealt the worst hand imaginable. The first X, killed at the very monument built by his sacrifice, everything he stood for was destroyed by somebody he didn't even know why he was truly fighting, as his hands were forced by unknown motives. The very boy he saved being his undoing, and he will never know why. This is the grounds that 2B Hero X is willing to walk on, which can only be described as tragic. Per the director's own words, who Ren on Twitter was so graciously able to translate, young Chang is the most complex character in the series. His arc represents the cruelty underneath the surface, and mark my words, we will be back for all of this someday. There are victims piling up as this story goes on, and the pile is only going to get bigger. For today's video, however, we acknowledge the tragedy that is the life of the original E-soul. Rose to the occasion in the darkest of times, persisted to keep the light he shined glowing bright for years, and brought down by the very boy he inspired, thus leaving us to conclude that even in death, his peace is unknown.